These are tough times. A combination of high operating costs,
Farmers say this has been a perfect storm. They were already battling higher.
One of those farmers calls the president's tariffs, quote, the ice cream.
Why are countries that depended on American corn for decades suddenly stepping back? And how did Canada move in so fast? What we're witnessing isn't just a market shift, it's a quiet power reshuffle in global agriculture. Long-standing trade routes are being questioned, contracts rewritten, and for the first time in years, buyers are actively searching for alternatives. This is bigger than charts and numbers. When a country exporting over 62 million metric tons of corn, worth nearly $14 billion, starts facing hesitation from its biggest customers, it signals something deeper, a crack in trust. For years, U.S. corn set the global standard, reliable, consistent, almost untouchable. Nations like Mexico, Japan, and South Korea built entire supply chains around it without a second thought. But now, that confidence is slipping. Concerns over grain quality, moisture inconsistencies, rising tariffs, and shipping costs are forcing buyers to rethink everything. And while the U.S. hesitates, Canada is stepping in, offering stability at the exact moment the market demands it. This shift is already impacting prices, politics, and global food security in ways we're only beginning to understand. If you're seeing the bigger picture, hit like and subscribe, because this story is just getting started. At the same time, pressure inside the United States is hitting hard, and it's not just one problem, it's everything at once. Farmers are dealing with rising fertilizer costs, unstable fuel prices, and expensive freight, all while global demand starts to hesitate. That creates a dangerous squeeze in an industry where profits already depend on steady exports and long-term contracts. And now, the impact is showing. Corn planting is expected to drop from nearly 98.8 million acres to around 95.3 million, a clear sign that farmers are pulling back as inventories climb toward 9 billion bushels and prices struggle to keep up with production costs. In simple terms, growing more corn no longer guarantees making more money. But while the U.S. is navigating this uncertainty, Canada has been moving quietly and strategically, not as a loud competitor, but as a reliable alternative. And right now, reliability is everything. From farm standards to port handling, from certifications to delivery timelines, Canada is offering consistency that global buyers are starting to prioritize over sheer volume. That's why Canadian exporters are locking in multi-billion-dollar deals across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Because today's buyers aren't just looking for the biggest supplier, they're looking for the most dependable one. What's even more surprising is how fast this shift is happening. Changes like this usually take years, but this one is accelerating, driven by geopolitical tensions, stricter quality standards, and growing concerns around GMOs, labeling transparency, and compliance. Countries that once accepted U.S. shipments without question are now inspecting more closely and even rejecting cargoes that don't meet new standards. And in global trade, perception spreads faster than facts. Once doubt enters the market, it can reshape decisions overnight. And that's exactly where Canada has found its moment. If you're following this shift, take a second to like the video and subscribe, because this story is unfolding faster than anyone expected. Canada didn't take over by flooding the market with more corn. It did it by mastering trust. While others struggled with uncertainty, Canada aligned itself perfectly with what buyers now demand: stricter inspections, consistent quality, reliable delivery. And in a global market driven by confidence, that perception alone can redirect billions in trade overnight. But this shift goes far beyond farms. It touches everything. When agricultural trade patterns change, they ripple into food prices, politics, transport systems, even tariff wars, quietly reshaping entire economies. And in Washington, the alarm bells are loud, because when farm income drops, it's not just economic, it's political. That tension became clear when U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick criticized India for not importing American corn. But that argument missed the bigger picture. India isn't a market waiting to be captured. It's one of the world's largest agricultural producers, built on decades of self-sufficiency. It produces most of what it needs, and when it does import corn, where public opinion, environmental concerns, and political risk make accepting GM imports a sensitive issue. So while the US sees barriers, India sees protection of its farmers, its consumers, and its independence. A system built over decades since the Green Revolution transformed the nation into one that can largely feed itself. And in this shifting global landscape, that independence is becoming more powerful than ever. India isn't alone. This cautious shift is going global. Across the world, buyers are starting to question key aspects of American corn, from inconsistent quality to regulatory gaps and the long-term risks of GM crops. Even China, once a massive buyer, has sharply reduced imports, choosing instead to boost its own production and diversify suppliers. And that tells you everything. Relying on a single source is no longer seen as safe in a world shaped by geopolitical tension and fragile supply chains. Because today, global agriculture is more connected than ever, but also more vulnerable. A single disruption can ripple across continents, and trust built over decades can collapse in months if expectations aren't met. And that leads to a bigger question. If the US is no longer the default supplier, and Canada keeps rising as the reliable alternative, what happens next to global food power? That question became real by mid-2025, when multiple US corn shipments were rejected across key markets, not for one issue, but a combination of pesticide concerns, labeling problems, and stricter safety standards. And when countries like Japan and South Korea start rejecting cargo they once accepted without hesitation, it sends shockwaves across the entire market. They didn't wait, they acted. Within months, both nations signed multi-year deals with Canada worth hundreds of millions, locking in stable, high-quality supply. Europe followed, quietly shifting purchases toward Canadian exporters who could meet strict regulations without friction. And just like that, what looked like a temporary disruption turned into a structural shift. The numbers prove it. US corn exports dropped nearly 30% in a single year, hitting not just farmers, but transport, storage, and the entire agricultural economy. Meanwhile, Canada didn't rush to grow more. It focused on doing things better. Stronger inspections, smoother logistics, consistent delivery, and buyers noticed. Even Mexico, the largest traditional buyer of US corn, began turning north, increasing imports from Canada by nearly 50%, crossing $400 million. In Asia, Japan locked in deals worth around $450 million, while Europe opened its doors wider to Canadian grain that met its strict standards. This isn't just competition anymore. It's a reorganization of the global system. And the speed of it? That's what's catching everyone off guard. These developments reveal a hard truth about global trade. Once buyers shift and build new supply chains, they rarely go back. Even if the original supplier fixes its problems, trust doesn't return overnight, and long-term contracts lock in new relationships for years. What started as a disruption quickly becomes a permanent reset. And this isn't just economics, it's politics. As exports fall and farmers feel the pressure, the conversation moves into policy, messaging, and national strategy, often simplifying a much deeper issue. We've seen this before in the soybean market, where the once dominant US-China relationship cracked under tariffs during Donald Trump's presidency. China, which once bought over half of US soybean exports, pulled back, and even when talks resumed, the trust was already damaged. And history warns us this isn't new. Back in 1973, when President Richard Nixon imposed a soybean embargo, countries like Japan turned to Brazil, and decades later, Brazil is still a major competitor. Now, China is following a similar path, investing in Brazil, boosting its own production, and building alternatives to reduce dependence on the US. And that's the real shift. This isn't temporary, it's structural. For American farmers, the challenge is massive. Replacing a market like China isn't easy, and rebuilding trust takes years of consistent performance, not quick fixes. At the same time, rising costs and stricter global standards make competition even tougher. All of this points to an industry at a turning point, where today's decisions will shape global agriculture for years to come. Because if trust is moving, contracts are shifting, and new players like Canada are rising, then the future of corn trade will look very different from its past. The era of unquestioned dominance is fading, replaced by a world where reliability and adaptability decide who leads. So what happens next? Can the US win back its position, or has the market already moved on? And can Canada sustain this momentum? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture, hit like and subscribe. The next few years will decide everything.